Welcome to the Capability Chronicles. I'm your host, Abby Bardell. Capability Chronicles is a series of programs produced to encourage an inclusive community by featuring the strengths and contributions of people with disabilities. Today, we will be visiting with Faye Weatherly and Bill Lardy. We've all seen and used the curb ramps and the sidewalks around town, around every town. We take advantage of them and we appreciate it, but they weren't always there. And sometimes it's important to go back and look at how it all began. In 1977, in the state legislature, with legislators like Representative Bill Lardy and with advocates like Faye Weatherly. Faye, I understand that your self-advocacy began after you acquired a disability, so perhaps we can talk about that history. How did you acquire your disability?
Playing baseball.
Playing baseball?
Mm-hmm. I got struck in the left elbow by a pitcher throwing the ball, and I had a blood clot on the brain. I had surgery in Fargo, and then I was there about four months.
When was that?
1963.
Okay. And you recovered to the point where you could become employed and on your own. When you look back to the early 60s, were there any accommodations for people with disabilities in that time?
Not many.
Okay.
Very few curb cuts or anything.
How would a person who used a wheelchair then get access into buildings or even get into their own homes?
I probably built a homemade ramp.
Okay. In your remembrance of your early years with your disability, do you have any stories to share about how you gained access to public facilities or to your home?
Well, I lived on the farm, and my dad put up a railing on the steps so I could get up and down. But I was on a walker then. So that was the beginning of it, and to this day we're still fighting.
You lived in Jamestown and worked in Jamestown. You've relayed a story to me in the past about having to get into a event at the Jamestown Elks Club or the Jamestown Eagles Club.
Yeah, I used to ride the elevator up, and it would just shake, and I never knew if I'd get to the top floor.
And this was just a freight elevator that was in the back of the building?
So when they hauled all the liquor up stairs and different stuff.
So that must have given you an interesting perspective, not to be able to walk into a family function using the front door like everyone else did. So are these sorts of experiences what motivated you?
More or less, yes.
Bill, How long had you been a legislator when you introduced the curb cuts legislation?
Well, as I recall, I had been a legislator about a month and a half. I was elected in November of 1976, and so my term began in early January of 1977. And so the bill was introduced and heard sometime in early February, as I recall, 1977. So it was about a month, I suppose, that I was a legislator.
How do you suppose this came about? Who suggested to you that we needed these curb cuts?
Well, I think I said I was elected out of Dickinson, the city of Dickinson. And after I was elected, the AAUW, the American Association of University Women, approached me and asked me if I would sponsor a bill that would require cities to put in curb cuts. And I was really surprised at this because I thought there was already a requirement that curb cuts be provided at the intersections of streets. And so, as I say, I was surprised at that, and when I was told that it isn't a requirement, I was very glad to put my name on the bill as prime sponsor. I was elected with a fine gentleman, John Gengler, also from Dickinson, and being a new legislator, I didn't know how really to go about the process. So I asked John if he'd help me by sponsoring the bill and help me get the bill drafted. And so it was just the two of us, Representative Gengler and myself, that introduced the bill and followed it through the House and ultimately the Senate as well.
So this was the first time that this legislation had been introduced to the North Dakota legislature?
There were other bills that described the needs for people living with disabilities, but as I recall, this was the first effort to introduce to get a bill passed that would require ramps or curb cuts at intersections.
So in your recollection, were there similar laws in place in other states at this time?
I understand that there were a few, but this was drafted specifically for North Dakota. We didn't rely on any model legislation in order to put the law into the statute. It was how we decided to word it, and it was fit just for North Dakota.
All right. So Faye, go back, you're a young man and you're rolling into the legislature for the first time. Were you very intimidated, and was this an ordeal for you to introduce yourself?
Very nervous. I mean, when you wheel in there and see all these the legislators and they look at you like, what are you doing here? Why are you here? And after we won a few times, they started calling me by my right name. And so that made you feel like you were getting noticed by going there.
So this was 1977. Were there many other self-advocates with disabilities at that time?
I can't remember a lot of them. I mean, it's a long while ago.
Mm-hmm. So Faye, as a person with a disability, do you think you had more difficulty getting the legislators to notice you or to listen to what you had to say?
No, because
Senator Evan Lips
was very interested in the Disability Act. And I think he done a lot for us.
So can you recall if there were any specific strategies that you used to strengthen your communication, to make your case?
That, I don't know.
Perhaps sheer persistence?
Maybe.
Abby, if I may say that I think Faye's being there in his wheelchair was really the strongest statement possibly that he could make. There was another person that appeared in the Senate supporting the bill, Darrell McFarland, and as I recall, he too used a wheelchair. And so it was people like Fay and Darrell who really made the statement. As I said, I was a novice, an extreme novice at the legislative process, and certainly wasn't ready for the kinds of questions that the committee members put to me during the hearings on the bill. And so I did what I could. Probably didn't do the bill any good, but it was people like Fay and Darrell that really carried the day.
And we had been speaking earlier about the fact that without the curb cuts, so many people with disabilities weren't able to get out
Absolutely.
and about.
Right.
So perhaps it was just a startle factor that, who is this young man? Who is this articulate young man? Where did he come from? I would imagine that would have carried as much weight as anything.
I'm convinced you're right. Darrell mentioned Senator Evan Lips from Bismarck, who was a strong advocate and a very fine gentleman and a great legislator. Another one too that comes to my mind was Senator Herschel Lashkowitz. He was served in the Senate during that same session I was there, and he was also on the conference committee. And being the a former mayor of Fargo, Senator Lashkowitz was really a strong advocate, and he spoke with a great deal of background information and history on city governance and so on. And so I think it's his advocacy as well that really helped carry the day for the bill in the Senate, and I expect when it came back to the House for final vote.
So the bill was assigned to its first committee in the House in early February and didn't go to the governor for his signature until April 7th. Did it seem, Fay, impossible for it to pass at times?
All we could do was hope that it did pass.
You were optimistic?
Well, yeah, no. I mean, it could or it couldn't, but it did, so we're very thankful.
And what was your mindset at the time?
I couldn't figure out why they were sitting on the bill. I think the bill was passed out of the House, I want to say February 17th of 1977, and it took a long time for it to be heard in the Senate. And I couldn't figure out why it wasn't being brought to the floor of the Senate for action. So it did seem to me that, if they wanted to kill it, why didn't they go right ahead and do that? And if they wanted to pass it, why not get it out of the way rather than leave it to the very end, where it turned out it went to a conference committee, and the conference committee amended it or suggested amendments, and then went to the Senate and finally back to the House.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Fay, did you have something?
No.
The conference committee included Rood and Tenefos, who had spoken and voted against it. Do you recall that?
Yes. I don't recall the exact words they used, but Representative Rood and Senator Tenefos, at least Senator Tenefos, said, well, in residential areas, people with wheelchairs can use driveway ramps, the aprons for driveways, to gain access to the street level. That seemed a rather odd argument to me because not everybody has a driveway, and a driveway that may be available may be some distance down the street from where the person actually wants to cross. I guess the thing that I'm pleased about is that people saw the good that the bill was advocating, the very good that the bill could do, and didn't look at the possible negatives or other reasons why the bill shouldn't be passed.
So, Bill, how did you negotiate with the opposition and negate their arguments?
You have two questions, I think, Abby, and I don't recall ever negotiating with anybody over the bill. I did agree to some changes, and the reason I say I didn't negotiate because I wasn't smart enough to know that I could negotiate. How did I negate some of their arguments? Well, I tried to look at it as realistically as I could. I recall one argument was that people have stumbled on them. Because they're not used to them, they may cause people to stumble. And so then I said, well, has anybody in a wheelchair complained about the ramps? And the person that I asked the question of said no. No one who was in a wheelchair had complained to him about having to use a ramp. There were other arguments about the cost, whether or not this, in order to implement the bill, would require a great deal of cost on the city's part. And I rather anticipated that, and I said, well, we're not requiring that the city modify every curb at every intersection, only when they're doing some extensive curb and gutter repair work would they be asked to modify or required to modify the curb. And so, as I said, I tried to be realistic and look at it realistically, so that some of the arguments that I thought were specious in opposition to the bill wouldn't be taken by the majority of the people who are voting, the senators and the representatives, and I'm glad the majority did choose to pass it.
Faye, so do you think that as someone with an acquired disability, you might have a bigger fire inside of you that makes you want to affect change, made you want to affect change back in the early 60s, mid-70s?
Yes, because no one is convenient now for bikes, baby strollers, and everything. But you don't see as many bikes on the street or baby strollers. They live there, it all help them.
Even people with back trouble. So Faye, I'll ask you this first. Do you think that there is a disability issue that advocates are working on right now that will be a challenge to move forward, but we'll look back on and say, was that so hard, like right now?
I don't really know the answer to that. I really don't know.
Okay. Bill?
I really don't know either of any particular issue. I think of veterans who are injured in battle and who are living with disabilities now that, as Faye did, I mean, it came upon him suddenly after living a quite vigorous life, and suddenly these people are faced with challenges that they didn't know existed before. And so I can't think of anything specifically, but I'm certain that there will be some. One thing that does come to my mind is a veteran who I believe he was denied the right to run in a race because he had lost both limbs and had no feet, and so he was using what I would call springs as his feet. And he was not allowed to race with the others because the other participants, the other competitors, felt he had an unfair advantage with these prostheses that he was using. And so I think issues like this are going to have to be resolved. You know, in games of competition where a person with a disability may be considered to have somewhat an advantage over another person that has no apparent disabilities. I think that's an issue that will have to be, some of those kinds of things will have to be addressed.
Faye, ask you the same thing. What would you say to someone who wants to make changes in their community, but are a little too timid, a little too afraid, don't know how to go about it? How would you counsel them?
I'd say go to your representative, senator, whoever's in your unit, in your city, and talk to them and get them a bill going, you know.
If I could just follow up what Faye said. Faye suggested that people who want to advocate for changes that will help people who live with disabilities, he said he encouraged people to go talk to their legislators, and for that matter I think they could also go to members of the city council and so on. But the thought occurred to me as he was talking that when I was asked to support this bill or introduce the bill, I was so naive that I didn't think there'd ever be a problem with it. It seemed to me that this is the right thing to do, and that if it's the right thing to do, you just go ahead and do it, and fight to get the job done, and not let the artificial roadblocks that all of us can throw up on any change, not let those artificial roadblocks get in the way of trying to do something when it seems so right. And I'm just grateful that a majority of the people in the House and the Senate agreed with me and said that yes, these curb cuts are indeed not just good for people who have disabilities or living with disabilities, but for every member in the community.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for joining us today and visiting about curb cuts and how it all began here in North Dakota. We hope that this program has provided you with a deeper insight into the disability world and has encouraged individuals in our community. For more information on the Capability Chronicles, visit www.thearcofbismarck.org.
If you enjoyed this program, would like to see it again, or send the link to your friends, it's available at freetv.org.